The Hearthstone ladder has gone through some massive changes to the balance patch, and I think it's been a minute since we've had the meta shake up this drastically in quite a long time, because in the first balance patch, Rogue was still good, and in this next balance patch, well, Rogue is still good, but the thing is about this update is that so many more classes are now able to compete with Rogue. Rogue is still crazy, it still does insane things, but now other decks are able to not only contest it, they are able to somewhat, overrun it a little bit, to where Rogue's popularity has decreased a little bit in top 1000 Legend. But trust me, the top 5 decks of the meta are not at all what they used to be. There may be some familiar decks, and I plan on going over 15 decks in this video, but just trust me that things are very different than what they used to be. Last night, I ended my run at 24 Legend, and because of Decay, when I woke up this morning, I'm now sitting at top 50, and I plan on streaming right now at twitch.tv/ClarkHellScream, so if you want to see the best decks in action, go ahead and check that out. But I just wanted to show you guys my rank in order to let you guys know that I have been busting a lot of Hearthstone games this season. So let's go ahead and take a look at the best 5 decks of the meta right now. And I'm going to tell you guys that this deck may be the most powerful because, I'm a little bit biased towards it because this is what I used on my Legend grind. And honestly, I think this deck is 100% solved in all honesty. I know there's a lot of cards like Peasant, and there's a way of like potentially putting in like a second Famish Fool into the deck. Like right now, there's another list running around where you cut Sylvanas for a second Famish Fool, and I kind of like this idea, so that way, the deck has consistent card draw, and you can find your Lord Marogar or your Grave Strengths, which are the best cards in the deck by far, in those situations where you need them. But to be honest, I am really sold on Sylvanas as a card, only because Sylvanas gives you a tool that this deck sometimes desperately needs in order to, get over that hump over a lot of decks with Taunt, for example. Killing a Taunt is extremely powerful, but there are some times where just taking control of a minion, like, for example, in the Paladin matchup, taking a 5/5 Taunt, or if they decide to put in the Seal of Blood on it and make an 8/8 Taunt with Divine Shield, I have taken that from a Paladin before, and I pretty much won the game because of that. So I think that Sylvanas actually has a huge plus side on this deck in order to beat decks that essentially are aiming to checkmate you, and this is your way of being, no, you get checkmated. But it is a fantastic tool to use in this deck, and I would highly recommend it. And also, for you guys who've never seen this before, this is my very first all-golden deck. And if you guys look at the signature card and call me out for it, I'm not gonna let you win. This is my first ever golden deck, and I decided to spend all of my dust on this deck because I'm confident in it. I'm probably going to use it for most of the season, and honestly, it's a lot of fun. So if you are an Unholy Death Knight fan, this is your time to shine, and this is your meta to finally rise up. The next deck is yet another Death Knight. Frost DK is still really good, however, it's kind of gone through a little bit of changes since the nerfs, and it's not because Glacial Advance is any worse right now, it's just because this deck had to change a little bit in order to beat the decks that it is encountering. So this deck was pretty much still just kind of fine as it used to be, but people seem to now be going 100% towards Slitherer, and there's not really a lot of people using the Death Knight 1-mana 1/2 anymore. I saw a lot of people really experimenting with this card during the last patch, and I'm not really sure what the exact reason was, but I have seen this card completely drop off like a fly. I don't see it anymore. This is really the only list that I see, and to be honest, this list is pretty solidified in all honesty. Like, a lot of these cards are something we've seen before, Bonebreaker, Death Chiller. Death Chiller just seems to be the go-to for Frost Death Knight now. But now we are always running the Bonebreaker instead of running Sword or running Might of Minithel. Maybe you can squeeze in a Might of Minithel just so that way you can try and set up, Freeze on turn 6 into Freeze on turn 7. I'm not really sure which one is better in all honesty. It's just about which of these strategies is best going into the decks that you are seeing the most. So the reason why a lot of people were playing this card in the beginning was because rogues were summoning stealth minions and you had to freeze them in order to get to that crucial turn 7 turn. Because against rogues, that card is massive. So there might be a reason to run this card if you are seeing the matchups where you want to freeze minions going into like turn 6 and whatnot, as well as having this additional 8 damage. But I think overall, this is just a really solid list. I don't know if it's the best, but it is definitely the most popular, and I've seen it the most at my top 20 legend range when I was playing a lot yesterday. Frost DK and the next deck were actually a lot more popular than Unholy Death Knight, but in all honesty, I feel like all 3 of these decks I'm about to show you are all very relevant, not only to climb to Legend, but to maintain in Legend. Oh no, who would have saw this coming? It's yet another Death Knight. Guess what? All 3 runes in Death Knight are playable right now. And here's a screenshot in order to show you guys just exactly what's going on. Death Knight is working at top legend. And on the EU server in particular, Blood Death Knight, for some reason, is doing extremely well. And I think it's because there's a lot of aggressive matchups, and cards like Blood Boil absolutely destroy a lot of these meta-relevant decks that you'll be seeing right now. Like, I mean, Unholy Death Knight, I hate to say it, Unholy Death Knight hates to see this deck. They need to literally miss one key turn, meaning like Blood Boil on 5, Corpse Explosion, not having no Muncher. Like, they need to have a lot of cards that they miss in order for you to win the game. And that's honestly just how Blood Death Knight feels against everything. Like, you have these massive turns where it's like your opponents are quite literally doing everything they want to, and then you deny it because, like, case in point, say your opponent just summons a bunch of 2/2s as like aggro mage, you can just play Blood Boil and then essentially negate the damage completely. Or if you are against like an Unholy Death Knight, then you just completely reverse it by destroying their board and gaining a bunch of life. Vampiric Blood, putting yourself to 50. We already know how this deck works. But the thing that's really interesting to point out, that Disruption is the name of the game with this deck, which is why we're running cards like Blade Master Okani, and why Theotar is so important. And honestly, I'll give you one matchup where Theotar is very important. The Combo Druid matchup. In order for you to have any real game in that sort of matchup, you need to be able to stop their Astalor combos. And there might be times in like the Blood Death Knight Mirror where like taking their JAlex, taking a Patchwork, there's a lot of things that these disruption tools can help you with in order to buy you just those 1 or 2 extra turns that you need in order to have like a massive healing combo. And honestly, this is gonna be my big prediction of this video, but I feel like Blood Death Knight is already kind of hated as a class, as an archetype, just because people hate the idea of going up against a hero with like 60-some life. This is probably going to be the deck that people are going to be complaining the most about if this is going to stick itself in tier 1, and right now it is sitting around tier 1. So it's about whether or not it maintains, and if it does, I believe this may be one of the most hated decks in honestly Hearthstone history, because people just don't like the idea of grindy control matchups that don't ever end. I mean, you can always hit the concede button, but like, I'm just taking an opinion. I'm just taking a crack at what I think the community will react to if this deck is actually good. But trust me, Blood Death Knight is extremely good, and I'm actually gonna be streaming this deck a lot on my stream today. Now let's get into the stuff that's not Death Knight, because honestly, this top 5 nonsense, I'm just going to tell you what's good and what's not as good. But I would honestly say that this would definitely crack a top 5 list, maybe even top 3, top 2, probably even top 1 for a lot of people, because Rogue is still insanely good. It's mind-blowing how many times we have to nerf this class, and yet it's still seeing play at a high tier 2 level and is not really seeming like it's going to die off. The only thing that makes Rogue have like a 46% win rate or whatever on HS Replay is because this is a hard deck to play if you are a beginner. Rogue decks have always been that way because when your strategy is quite literally playing a lot of cards, it's a matter of when you do it, not just doing it. Like, you have to be able to time your combo turns right, so that way you get the maximum amount out of your Draka, which has come back into the meta. And also these Frostwolf War Masters and Mailbox Dancers seem to be the best way to play this deck right now because, again, it feels the Draka, it feels the Sinstone. It just, this deck went from, you know, just only focusing on Sinstone, and we don't even need Draka anymore because it's way too slow, to, well, Draka is just really good now because the meta slowed down just enough to where the old deck is not good. Wild Paw Nulls are pretty much bad unless you're running a Burgle package in particular, which some decks still are. There are still some decks that are running Wild Paw Null. However, I believe this is much better than anything Wild Paw Null can honestly give you. And in all honesty, this was made by JAlex. He's still playing this deck. This archetype is probably still one of the most popular at Legend. This was not the most popular deck that I saw on my climb, but I did see Rogues the most, and it was a combination of this deck as well as Thief Rogue. Thief Rogue is still insanely good. The scams that this deck can generate are insane. And in all honesty, Trickster being 4 mana is quite literally a sin that should be rectified. But this card is on its way out. There's probably no need to change it because it's not impactful in Wild. But oh my god, am I tired of Jackpot into Trickster, because it seems like they never miss. At least they never miss against me. But in any case, this deck is now becoming somewhat relevant. People are running Tooth and Nefarian again. People are running the Sunwell. Not really sure about that, but this was the deck that I saw the most, I think, out of my climb. And it's kind of funny how Miracle Rogue is still good, but this deck is starting to become more popular. I don't know. People seem to just really like Thief Rogue, and I don't blame them. This is a fun deck, but the the frustration that this deck can cause when you are an aggro deck fighting a rogue where you're really favored, and then suddenly jackpot hits, you know, Flame Strike or some kind of AoE. Like, the thing okay, I have to tell you about one game in particular where this deck made me really mad. I couldn't remember if it was Thief or if it was Miracle, but I was playing Unholy Death Knight. They hit Potion Belt for 2 random cards for 3 less mana, and on turn 4, when I had like complete dominance of the board, the rogue played Hellfire in order to wipe out my board, and then played Burden of Pride, which is the warrior, I think, 3/4 mana spell that summons 1/3s with taunt, and then gives them +1/+1 if you have like a certain amount of HP. I think it's like less than 20 or something. And the Hellfire put them less than that, and that game was complete bullshit. And it's just like, this is what Rogue can do. There's just so many insanely powerful plays. Rogue is not going anywhere until a rotation happens, and I really don't think there's any amount of nerfs they can do that won't... I really don't think there's any more nerfs they can do to Rogue without absolutely killing the class, and that's not the goal of nerfs. So Rogue is not going anywhere until a rotation happens. Next up is Aggro Mage, and it's kind of funny how just powerful this deck has become, because like in the previous meta, Mage was really struggling, and it's not because Mage is bad, it's just because Mage was, well, completely countered because Astalor existed. You really couldn't use Solid Alibi and, like, you know, these control-heavy Mage decks. And Aggro Mage was doing good, but it wasn't doing good enough in order to beat Rogues. Now, Mage has kind of become the go-to in order to beat Rogue, and it's kind of funny how, like, it's done this complete 180, where Aggro Mage is now debatably the best deck in the game. I say this with very massive quotations because I have not played this deck yet, but Gamer RVG recently just hit almost rank 1 legend playing Aggro Mage and playing 1 game of Phylactery Warlock, because he queued into rank 2 with this deck, but he already had a high MMR anyway. But this deck is literally becoming the go-to for a lot of people in order to counter Rogue. And honestly, this deck is just overall extremely good, because when you play Azuin and you have like a 1 mana spell damage minion and then you play double Frost Touch, that is quite literally like 10 damage for 5 mana with like very little setup. And honestly, Frozen Touch is such a hell of a card to where this deck has an insane amount of reach the longer that the game goes on. It's kind of similar to Ping Mage in that regard. And honestly, Ping Mage is another deck that you can play. Luna just recently hit 12-1 on the Heroic Tavern Brawl, and honestly, this has been the go-to deck that a lot of people have been using in order to specifically try to beat Miracle Rogue. And I don't know, like, how polarized the meta was before this season, but like since this new season has gone live and like the 48 hours that it's been up, there have been a lot of changes and a lot of like massive shakes in the meta where like these decks are still, you know, popular. They're still like the same decks, but people are really starting to think about what they want to counter on the ladder, and this is one of those decks that is, you know, a product of that environment. I don't know how this does against all of the other strategies, in all honesty. I can't speak to the validity of this deck because I haven't played it since the balance changes, but it's quite literally the exact same list that it's been, except maybe this new edition of Arcane Worm. Maybe just because damage is very important, and as well as having the arcane cards for your multicaster. So this deck is just really good. Mage is really solid all around. It's just whether or not you want to play all-in aggressive, which kind of can play towards the late game, or whether or not you want to play this deck, which is like the counter towards Rogue and still has a good match against a lot of decks in the meta. Next up on this list is going to be one of the most interesting lists that you can probably take to Legend. And I use the word probably here because I am a big fan of Outcast Demon Hunter, and I actually want it to be meta relevant. And this is a new take on the deck that Glory, the world champion, Glory, decided to come up with. And this is like a combination of aggro and Outcast. And I think this is a really good way of combining both the packages. If I could add one card in here, I want to add Lady Setheno. But looking at the list, there's really not that many spells outside of like the Predation. So like, you're not even running Furies in this deck. So it's like running the Lady might be a little bit counterintuitive, especially since this deck is just, you know, play cards, deal damage, and then maybe give yourself some resources. So in case you guys don't know, Wrecked Exile is the reason why Outcast Demon Hunter is a thing. But the other reason why it's a thing is because the buff to this card going from 7 to 6 is a big deal because of how many easy cards you have that are outcastable. 7 to 6 is definitely a big deal because that's just one less card that you have to play. And there have been literally times where I played both of these by turn 4, one of them by turn 3, I believe. I almost did this on turn 2, and that's like with the absolute giga tier nuts. But even then, I think it's just barely short. Regardless, this thing's just a corridor creeper with rush, and then the rest of the deck is just, you know, aiming to deal a lot of damage. You still got, you know, the typical aggro Demon Hunter package, and I think this deck has a lot of game, and I actually really want to try this at Legend, but I am kind of scared risking the top of the ladder Legend ranks with this deck because I'm not sure how good it does in the top Legend. Getting to Legend, I think this is a great deck. If you are a newer player, or if you are someone that is not sitting at the Legend ranks all too frequently, this is going to be a deck that probably slaughters people at your rank, because number one, they don't really know how, like, the cards that they're playing around, because Outcast Demon Hunter is not that popular, and number two, this deck's just an aggro deck. It's gonna go face, it's gonna deal a lot of damage, and some people just don't know how to play around aggro decks. So if you're looking for something new, I would highly recommend Outcast Demon Hunter, but this aggro version of the deck might be a legitimate way to turn this into like a tier 1, tier 2 archetype. And now I'm going to show you guys one more fun deck before we get into the other decks that you can definitely play in Legend, but I wouldn't necessarily rate them as the top 5 best decks in the meta, but they're still really good. So here is the most interesting list that I have seen out of all of my time in this patch. It is Murloc TINYFIN Combo Druid. This deck is just all in on the combo. There's really nothing else to it. It's just standard Astalor nonsense. But you do run Murloc TINYFIN, you do run Druid of the Reef, you have Lingering Zombies as well as Living Roots, so that way you play a bunch of minions. Why do I care about playing minions? Well, this deck plays Composting. So that's the reason why this deck is really fun, is because you're pretty much just going hyper combo for the Astalor combo, where like as soon as you have all the pieces drawn, you hopefully have all the mana ready to go. You still have Nourish, you still have Wildheart Guff, obviously, in order to make the deck legitimate. And honestly, Jared Carpenter with Living Roots may divide a lot of people, but to be honest, one thing that I kind of like about this is because you're probably going to keep Living Roots in a lot of situations, so that way you can just, you know, kill a minion, maybe summon some 1/1s to contest. So this is still a good combo, and it's just, you know, better ways of being able to make sure you always get the value out of this card. One other card that we have to point out is Incarceration. I believe this is quite literally just for the Rogue matchup, so that way you can, you know, just incarcerate the big ghosts so you don't have to worry about it, because this deck is just all about getting rid of everything. And if you think about it, you could also use Incarceration before the combo turn, so that way Astalor only goes face. This deck is fun. It's a fun way to play the Astalor combo, which is one of the most interactive combos that's available right now in this game, but it's got Murloc TINYFIN. I can't sell it any better than that. Give respect to the TINYFIN. Try out this deck if you want to try a different way of playing the combo that's just all in on drawing cards and dealing the damage, and give respect to Murloc TINYFIN, because I think Snowflipper Penguin might replace him in the future, and this is very, very disturbing news for me. Next up, I'm just going to show you a bunch of lists at the same time without explaining them, because we all know how good these decks are. Curse ImpWarlock, Pure Paladin, Spell Demon Hunter, Big Spell Mage, Evolve Shaman, and Spit Hunter are all decks that you can play not only to Legend, but maintain in Legend. Curse Warlock is a deck that I've literally seen someone grind at Legend 2, just playing this deck and just beating a bunch of people, because this is still a massive... It's still a massive deck, dude. It's still insane. The curses... The early game, we all know how good Curse ImpWarlock is. It's still seen play even at top 2, top 1 Legend. Pure Paladin is probably going to be the most popular list that a lot of lower ranked players are going to swarm to, just because it's a simple aggro deck, it's fun, and it's got random legendaries, so who doesn't like that? However, I still don't believe that this is the best version of this deck. In fact, I don't know why Invigorating Sermon is here. Oh wait, I actually have to tell you guys about an amazing new tech. You know Invigorating Sermon? Yeah, we definitely don't run this card. I have actually been seeing people play Elitist Snob in the role of the 5-drop for a multitude of reasons. Number one, you play Order in the Court, so after you draw your Countess and the Blood Crusader, you need something else that you can do. Sometimes Cariel and your 4-drops are just not enough, and Invigorating Sermon is definitely a joke. What is not a joke, and what has quite literally beaten me unlucky before is when someone played Elitist Snob after playing their Countess turn. They barely had any health left. They didn't find a taunt after I had cleared their light rays, and then suddenly Elitist Snob gave them just enough health in order for them to stay out of range of my lethal, and then they reversed the game on me and then took the W. So this card might actually have some very legitimate ways of being run in this deck, especially as a way of generating, you know, a minion that can do something after you've played your legendary minions, or you've already, like, you know, you've rolled them and you failed them and they're not what you need. So this is like one great tool that I feel like people might be sleeping on to a degree, but if you really want to play Invigorating Sermon, it's still okay. It's not bad, but it's not good either. This is a pretty decent replacement in that department. So if you're wanting to play pure Paladin, I would highly recommend changing your Invigorating Sermon for a Elitist Snob. Spell Demon Hunter is another deck that has been kind of coming back, and relics are going back into the forefront, but it's called Spell Demon Hunter because we're pretty much running all spells. We're running a Deal with the Devil, as well as, you know, Fedora Warband. This deck is, honestly, it's not as powerful as it used to be, but every single time I go up against this deck, it does something shocking. And I feel like, you know, it can definitely hit Legend. I just wonder where it starts to fall off a little bit. But if you're, you know, a Relic Demon Hunter stan, this is your time to shine. This deck is still good, and spells and lifesteal can be really important in this meta where a lot of aggressive decks are just trying to kill you as soon as possible. So play some lifesteal and ruin their day. You still got big Spell Mage. There's really not too many changes to this list, if any, I think. They just added Astalor. Really nothing else to say. This deck is pretty straightforward. Just, you know, go for Barbaric Sorceress, go for Belinda, play big spells. The reason why this deck is good is because scams are good right now. And speaking of scams, here you go, another scam deck. This is the best deck, I think, according to Age's replay data at the lower legend ranks. And the reason why this deck is extremely good is because of its consistency of being able to draw specific combos, building up board, as well as a potential scam with the Wild Pawn Knoll and the Muck Pools synergy. If you haven't learned anything from this video so far, if it's aggressive or if it has like a major scam combo potential, it is probably good in this meta. And as you've seen, this deck is pretty much a combination of both of those. This deck has also been nerfed twice, to where Shockspitter went from 2 mana to 3 mana to now 4 mana, but this card is still good because you can discount it with the, oh wait a minute, why isn't the weapon in here? There is not a, okay, hold on a minute. We are not running Harpoon Gun? Harpoon Gun should be in this deck 100%. I don't know, I grabbed this list, I don't care about Shockspitter Hunter. I would argue that this Keen Eye Spotter is probably not necessary. I feel like you just want to focus on the combo 100%, but maybe this deck is trying to go in a different direction to where it can play a little bit more for the board. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I feel like Keen Eye Spotter is not the way to go with this deck. The Stormpike Battle Ram, maybe you want to put in a second copy, but because you have selected breeders, you can always get that additional copy whenever you want. Doing this into turn 5 Hydrolodon, saving up for, like, you know, the Shockspitter value. Like, this deck, it actually feels fair now. I hated this archetype as soon as it came up because of how quickly it kills you. But with Shockspitter at 4 mana, potentially sitting at 2 mana, to where you can still do something on turn 6 if you have Harpoon Gun value and you've already swung a bunch of weapons. Like, that doesn't kill you nowadays. That really doesn't kill you. So, like, you swing the weapon, like, twice. You play Harpoon Gun twice. This is now sitting at, like, 4 damage by turn 6. That's fair. I would say that's a fair way to play this deck. But this deck is still frustrating because it's Hunter. It has these gigantic burst combos. It has Hydrolodon, and it has Hunter Secrets. So if you like Spit Hunter, this is just the way to play the deck. I don't know if running the Key Eye Spotter is the way to go, but according to HS Replay, this is the most popular version of the deck that people have been playing. But there you guys have it. Those are the top 5 decks in Standard right now, and honestly, I just gave you every single playable deck that is above a 50% win rate. There's probably some other decks that are really good at the lower ranks that aren't doing so well in Legend, but these are all the decks that you can not only climb to Legend, but you can maintain your Legend rank with. So if you guys enjoy these kind of deck lists, feel free to let me know. If you ended up using one of these decks and piloted to great success, feel free to let me know. I always love to hear when these videos make a difference. I make this kind of content just #1 because it's a great way of being able to document the meta game, so that way if I need to like pull up stats of a different meta, I have that video available. But let's be honest, I make this video for you guys. I make these kind of updates so that way you guys know how to have fun in Hearthstone, because we need to focus on having fun in Hearthstone more. It's not about winning, obviously. It's not about, you know, yada yada yada, what decks are good. It's about whether or not the deck you are playing is fun. And hopefully I gave you guys a fun deck to play. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully I gave you guys something that will make you enjoy Hearthstone just a little bit more. And I'll see you for the next video.